We are thrilled to bring to you today an excellent webinar based on a report that we just read. As people are filing in, I'd love to get a little interactivity here. So maybe just pop open the chat and tell us, since we're talking about underserved residential households today, what do you consider underserved? Who do you consider underserved? And if you're part of a program or you're working with a program to better serve these households, what have you done? We'd love to hear from the folks that are filing in right now. What is an underserved household? And have you done anything, or are you participating or helping run a program? What is that program to help serve these underserved households? And we'll just give people a few minutes here to shuffle in. It's great to see so many people on the line and from so many different places. This obviously is a very important topic, so we're excited to bring this to you today. And I'll just give it another couple minutes here. While we're waiting, please do put into the chat what you think is meant by an underserved household. Who is an underserved household, and how can we better serve those people? Are you part of maybe a program to do that? Low income, yes, Janet, thank you for that suggestion. Low income households are definitely an important group. English isolated households, I'd like to know more about that. Renters, folks experiencing energy burden, more about renters. I'm seeing a lot of great responses in the chat. Almost all multifamily households. BIPOC communities, thank you, that is an important area as well. BIPOC, a few people mentioning that. A household's a minority group, yeah. Weatherization in Alaska. Steve Meyer has a very thoughtful answer. Looks like 5 different points here. All right, thank you so much for everybody for showing up and starting that discussion. Throughout this webinar, I will be monitoring the chat. So let's get started with just the basics. You've all been in webinars many times now, I'm sure, but just so you know, we'll be recording this webinar and we'll be making it available to everybody within a few business days, everybody who registered, not just everybody who's attending. And we'll also provide the slides to everybody who's registered. To ask a question during the webinar, submit it via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And we'll get to it during the Q&A segment towards the end of the webinar. I will be asking questions to our speakers. You can also upvote questions that you think are particularly good. So if somebody's already put your question in, you don't have to write it again, just upvote the one that you like, and we'll prioritize that. You can also talk with one another and network via the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And I'll actually do my best to monitor that chat as well. I think it's always nice to bring up chat discussion topics that have been mentioned at the end of the webinar with our speakers. So with that out of the way, I also want to, I guess I'll just read this. This is what we are about ACEEE. We were bringing this webinar to you today. The American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy is a nonprofit research organization that develops policies to reduce energy waste and combat climate change. Our independent analysis advances investments, programs, and behaviors that use energy more effectively and help build an equitable, clean energy future. So you can learn more at our website, aceeee.org. And just a little bit about myself. My name is Reuven Sussman. You can see me at the bottom there. I'm just moderating here. I'm not going to present the information, although I am a co-author on one of the main reports that we'll be discussing. My job is the director of the Behavior, Health, and Human Dimensions program at the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. We just call it ACEEE for short. It's kind of a mouthful. And so I direct work on not just the health-related aspects and the report you're going to hear about today, but also behavior and social and environmental psychology and aspects of human behavior that having to do with energy efficiency. That's not what we're talking about today. Today, it's all about underserved residential customers and how to better serve them. And to start, I'm going to turn it over to Jasmine. We have 3 speakers today: Jasmine Ma, research analyst, the Behavior, Health, and Human Dimensions program; Alexis Washburn from the Northeast Regional Director of Emerald Cities Collaborative; and Alon Abramson, the Director of the Residential Programs, program, I suppose, at the Philadelphia Energy Authority. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Jasmine. You can go ahead and share your screen now, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Reuven. So just going to share my screen. Oh, here's the present. All right. So as Ruben said, my name is Jasmine Ma. I am a research analyst at ACEEE, and Ruben and I created this toolkit, Adapting Energy Efficiency Programs to Reach Underserved Residents. We started our research by interviewing utility stakeholders and program administrators who run statewide energy efficiency programs. We asked these stakeholders about groups that they considered their underserved residents, barriers they faced in reaching these residents, along with resources that they would find helpful in improving program participation. Through these interviews, we identified the following priority groups: all underserved households, income eligible or low and moderate income households, renters and residents of multifamily buildings, and rural households. We acknowledge that there are many more groups that could be considered underserved, such as tribal nations, communities of color, and environmental justice communities. However, these were the groups that our stakeholders identified as priorities, and thus they're the ones that we focused on for the toolkit. After the stakeholder interviews, we conducted a literature review to identify best strategies and practices, along with examples of successful programs that implemented these strategies. After the literature review, we then created the toolkit with sections for each of the underserved households. Within each section, there's a table of strategies with feasibility and impact ratings. Each strategy also comes with a description of the program barriers that the strategy can help overcome, along with steps to practically implement the strategy. We also provide successful program examples meant to inspire program administrators designing their own programs or trying to reform their current programs. And then finally, we end each section with additional resources, talking about funding sources, explaining some of the key concepts that we discuss, and just more recommendations for getting started and redesigning your programs. Here is an example of a table of the strategies. As you can see, each strategy has a feasibility rating and an impact rating. The feasibility ratings and impact ratings we determined through the literature review and discussions with experts at ACEEE. Feasibility ratings are meant to indicate an organization's capacity. They're ranked from easy, medium to difficult. Think of it as the amount of resources or the amount of time you would need to successfully implement the strategy. The impact ratings can go from moderate to high to very high, and it's meant to represent how implementing the strategy will improve, say, program participation or delivering benefits to underserved households. Think of it as a representation of your organization's goals or ambition. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about rural households, as rural households, in a way, are an underserved group within an underserved group. A lot of the obstacles that low-income households and renters in rural areas face are exacerbated by their rural settings. For example, a lot of rural areas are in sparse, geographically isolated areas, so it takes a lot of time and money to deliver programs to these residents. Further, a lot of these areas lack adequate infrastructure, like high-quality broadband, making them ineligible for products such as smart thermostats. In addition, a lot of these households use fuel oil or propane to heat their homes, so programs that focus on electric heating or gas heating are inaccessible for these households. Going to talk a little bit more about the first strategy, coordinating program offerings within the same state or same region. It was ranked as medium feasibility with high impact. So as mentioned, a lot of rural households live in these sparse, geographically isolated areas where contractors would have to drive very long distances to reach the households and to upgrade their homes. This is further exacerbated by the fact that a lot of rural utilities don't have as much capacity compared to utilities that serve urban and suburban customers. So to overcome these barriers, we suggest scheduling contractors to work in one area before rotating to the next. This can look like sending the contractors to town A, having them upgrade all the homes there, then moving on to town B, upgrading all the homes there, and finally moving on to town C and upgrading all the homes there. We figure this is a more efficient use of time and resources rather than just having the contractors go to scheduling contractors at random homes in various cities. We also suggest forming regional or cross-sector partnerships. For example, maybe the rural utilities that all are in one region can pull together their resources to create one program to serve all eligible residents. If any of you were paying attention to one of the earlier slides, you may have noticed that one of our general strategies that we recommend is creating a one-stop shop where residents can access all program resources in just one location. We also suggest forming cross-sector partnerships. For example, maybe rural utilities can partner with third-party program administrators to scale up energy upgrades, or they can talk to state housing finance agencies or state energy offices to access additional funding to scale their work. An example that we want to highlight is the Clean Energy Resources Teams, or CERTs, in Minnesota. It is a public-private partnership that helps residents and businesses fund clean energy projects. It does not explicitly serve rural customers, but given that much of Minnesota's population is rural, it does serve a lot of rural communities. CERTs consist of 4 partner organizations: the University of Minnesota, the Great Plains Institute, which is a research organization, the Southwest Regional Development Commission, which is a cross-governmental partnership, and the Minnesota Department of Commerce, which is a state agency. Each of these organizations offers its own expertise and has its own role. For example, the University of Minnesota handles a lot of the community outreach, whereas the Minnesota Department of Commerce offers financial incentives and technical assistance. CERTs is able to fund these clean energy projects through offering seed grants worth $5,000 to $10,000 that local communities can use to implement projects. A recent seed grant winner is the city of Hallstatt. It's a tiny town with a population of just 564 people. They won a $5,000 seed grant to insulate Wimmer Homes, which is this 14-unit housing complex that was originally built for low-income seniors. It is now open to all renters. The winning team used their seed grant money to add attic insulation and to protect these homes against Minnesota's very cold winters. A total of 31 people were served, and as you can see from the estimated annual savings, just a small amount of money, it can have a large impact in the lives of these rural households. This was a pretty recent project, and residents have already reported that their homes feel much more comfortable due to the attic insulation. So some things that I'd like you all to take away is that bringing energy efficiency to underserved households requires intentional program changes. Business as usual is not cutting it, and many households that could benefit most from energy efficiency are getting left behind. So for program administrators who would like to read the toolkit, I encourage you to first identify what types of underserved households you want to prioritize. Maybe your community already runs an excellent program for low-income homeowners, but you want to now tap into more to your rental market. You can also review the strategies in the toolkit and then evaluate strategies based on feasibility and impact. Again, assess your organization's capacity for pursuing certain strategies and your impact, as in how much do you want to scale up your program? What kind of a broader reach do you want to have? I also want to emphasize that the strategies are not meant to be an instruction manual. You do not need to follow them one by one in order. Rather, view them as a menu of options to choose from. You can then look to successful examples for best practices and lessons learned, while acknowledging that you may have to make adjustments given the different context of your different context. And then finally, you can turn to the additional resources for more recommendations and information on things like funding sources and additional tips. You can access the toolkit from the ACEEE website. I'm not sure if somebody can drop the link in the chat. We could do that soon. And that's about all I have to share today. If you'd like to ask me any questions, you can contact me at jma@aceeee.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we're going to turn it over to Alexis next.
Perfect. Let me just share my screen. Okay, I think everyone should be able to see that now. So thanks everyone for the warm welcome. So I'm Alexis Washburn. I'm with Emerald Cities Collaborative. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've been working to improve access to energy efficiency programming in Massachusetts. I'm going to talk today about this from a stakeholder engagement perspective. And so really focusing on the process pieces related to implementing some of the strategies that are mentioned in the toolkit. So to give you all a little bit of background about the energy efficiency planning process in Massachusetts, there's guiding and enabling legislation from many years ago that allows us, or has allowed us to create the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which really provides some direct guidance and oversees the development of our 3-year energy efficiency plan. And as a part of that work, there are various subcommittees and working groups that have been created to support additional development of recommendations, strategies, and policies, et cetera. But in 2020, the Equity Working Group was created by the council, and it was really created in response to address non-participation and provide recommendations to the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council to better improve participation rates among underserved households. And then again, just really wrapping all of this up, it's really focused on the development of our 3-year energy efficiency plan. We operate on a 3-year cycle. And so right now we're in the middle of implementing our 2022 to 2024 cycle. And so I'm going to talk about some of the strategies that we proposed and certainly those that have been implemented during this term. And then I'll also talk a little bit about our approach and perspective to planning for the next term, which is 2025 to 2027. It sounds far away, but it's right around the corner. So first, I want to talk a little bit about some of the baseline information that was collected. And so really one of the reasons why the Equity Working Group was created is because there were several non-participant studies that were conducted and released in 2020. And so those studies characterize which groups participate at rates that are lower than average across the state. And so we found that participation really varies by different groups. But finding that renters, moderate income customers, English isolated populations, and small businesses have historically participated at lower rates. And some of those key barriers to participation have included a lack of trust in programs, households prioritizing other needs that are considered more fundamental to living, a lack of awareness and information about the programs that are available, also perceiving energy efficiency as irrelevant. And so this is just a sample of some of those barriers. There are definitely more, but some of the major ones that emerged throughout the research that was conducted. And so as we were going into this process as the Equity Working Group, we really wanted to think about what are our guiding principles. Meaning, you know, we have this end goal of what we want to achieve. Obviously, we want to see greater participation from these underserved populations. But as Jasmine mentioned earlier, it really requires sort of intentional and thoughtful thinking when it comes to how do we actually make changes that result in the impacts that we want to see. And some of those guiding principles really were focused on developing community partnerships. And so recognizing that the program administrators and utilities, they can only go so far. And there are already organizations that are working with members throughout the community that already have trusted relationships established. And so working with those community-based organizations, establishing those direct partnerships can really help in providing resources to underserved communities to access programs. Additionally, as a part of some of the non-participant study analysis, we looked at participation across geographic regions in the state as well. And so here in Massachusetts, we have defined environmental justice communities, which meet a set of criteria really. And so one of the other guiding principles was really to think about how can we prioritize environmental justice and certainly prioritize increasing the resources in those specific communities to promote greater program participation. Some additional guiding principles, again, really wanting to actually increase meaningful program participation. And so what do I mean by this? It's not necessarily just delivering some of those instant savings measure kits. So, people getting light bulbs and shower heads and things like that, which are awesome and can be really helpful, particularly in instances where folks don't necessarily have control over a lot of changes that they can make to their housing. But we really want to think about how do we increase more meaningful participation to see deeper energy savings for folks, really reducing energy burden and overall improving quality of life. And so really increasing our focus on the uptake of weatherization and other climate-friendly heating and cooling measures by those underserved communities that I mentioned earlier, such as renters, moderate income, and language isolated households. And also viewing this really as, I would say, a multi-pronged approach. And so recognizing that all of these guiding principles are great, but also we need to have the workforce in place to do this work. And certainly if we want to reach communities that we haven't necessarily reached to the greatest extent possible before, we need to think about the future workforce. And so training youth and young adults for careers in clean energy, really to increase workforce diversity and better meet the needs of those underserved populations. And so just to go at a high level on some of the strategies that we've been looking at for 2022 to 2024, and those that are already actually implemented, is I've broken it down by the different underserved population groups, and then also how we've really thought about the recommendations so far in terms of achieving, these cross-cutting, objectives, I would say. And so for moderate income programs, I haven't talked a lot about low income programs in this presentation. Certainly, I think a lot of you mentioned in the chat that it definitely is, historically an underserved population. And I would say to an extent it is here in Massachusetts as well, but we also have really great and really robust program offerings for that customer segment. And so there's lots of work that's actively being done in that area as well, but I'll focus today a little bit more on the moderate income sector. And so really thinking about how do we make this process easier for folks. And so there's been, a lot of work to really create these robust program offerings. And the offers themselves are not super complicated, but really helping people understand what they qualify for and how they become eligible for additional incentives and support is really important. And certainly outside of the general program navigation, customers might need support with project facilitation, technical assistance, and support with evaluating contractor quotes, for example. And so that new innovation with having, someone that they can actually talk to navigate all of those sort of confusing parts of the programming is something that is being piloted for this term. Additionally, for language isolated households, we're looking at increased customer language support, both online and in person. And so for the most part, that's really been prioritized in offering resources in Spanish and Portuguese. And then there are also plans to increase the number of language offerings. And so a lot of the resources online have been translated, and then also just identifying, field staff, for example, that can provide additional language support. So for example, if we have a Spanish-speaking household, sending out a Spanish-speaking energy auditor to have that conversation with those folks. And then also just recognizing that we don't know everything, the program administrators don't know everything, our implementers don't know everything. And so really continuing with some of those focus groups with different community organizations that are working with these populations to better understand how we can meet their needs. For renters and landlords, that's really been a challenge, I would say, for us here in Massachusetts and how to reach those households. And so we've had renter-specific programs in the past and currently do as well, but haven't really thought discreetly about what are some strategic interventions that we can take that are very specific to renters, instead of dedicating more time and resources to diving deeper there. And that's really been a focus of this term. And so we have a new strategic renter plan, which outlines a ton of different strategies specifically for meeting the needs of renters and landlords. We've also increased our incentives for energy efficiency as well as barrier mitigation. For folks that are renters, recognizing that the split incentive is a huge challenge for a lot of different households. And so trying to, again, meet renters where they're at, meet landlords where they're at, and making sure folks that actually get the benefits that they deserve. And really, there's been more direct engagement with landlords through different events, different marketing materials, et cetera, to help them understand how the different programs have changed over time, and certainly might be more appealing to folks at this point. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention on this slide, at least, is just really the focus on community partnerships. And so recognizing that program implementation staff and program administrator staff is limited and not necessarily always connected to communities on the ground. And so in our previous plan term, we had our Community First Partnership Program, but it had since expanded it. And so the number of awards and the dollar value of those awards have been increased. And really serving more communities than we ever have before. And then additionally, adding a program support partner. So having a vendor there that can also provide some of that training, that capacity building support for the community-based organizations that are supporting this work, as well as the municipalities. Because I think we recognize that municipalities may not always have the resources necessarily to do some of that on the ground engagement, but there are other community-based organizations that are working with our underserved populations, maybe on different, policy issues or challenges such as housing, food, et cetera. And so energy is one of those additional resources that can be incorporated. And so I know this is really a focus on residential households, but I also wanted to talk about a couple of other strategies that we've been looking at, and certainly how some of those strategies might benefit in other areas, and then also recognizing how, some of the strategies that I mentioned for a particular customer segment are also being employed in other places as well. And so there's been a really great focus on workforce development. And so those strategies have continued to focus on building out the workforce, really focusing on HVAC and weatherization, career pathways for youth and young adults, particularly in environmental justice communities, as well as legislative action that required $12 million annually be sent to the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, which is a quasi-governmental organization. And so really that's focused on supporting increasing workforce diversity, supporting the growth of women and minority-owned businesses in this space, providing on-the-job training, and more. And so that's working with tons of different organizations across the Commonwealth to help deliver those services and really build out a robust clean energy workforce. And then lastly, I'll touch a little bit on some of the small business pieces. And so recognizing that a lot of small businesses are also renters, and that hasn't been something that we've always sort of conceptualized in the past, but recognizing that it is a reality. And so we've seen improved outreach and engagement through different Main Streets programs. And so thinking about the small businesses within different communities that are sort of aggregated in a particular area, really to increase the uptake of weatherization and HVAC improvements, especially since we're starting to move away from lighting improvements, at least in our programming. And so really thinking about how do we streamline these offers to ease participation burdens and, again, reduce program complexity. And so those are definitely themes that have been echoed throughout and our challenges throughout when it comes to reaching really any customer segment, I would say. So some of our lessons learned mid-implementation. So like I mentioned, all of the strategies that I just discussed have been implemented throughout our 2022 to 2024 plan. And so we're in 2023 now, and so we don't necessarily know the full results until the end of next year. But something that we've been learning along the way, and certainly really trying to take innovative approaches and be really iterative in this process, is recognizing that we really need multi-pronged approaches. So many of the barriers that we face are interconnected and they're interrelated. So we really need cross-cutting approaches to really ensure that we're successful in this work. And so we can have great incentive programs that reduce the cost for customers to pursue energy efficiency. But if we don't have the workforce in place, that presents another challenge. And so really thinking about how do we tackle each of these issues sort of across the board to result in increased program participation. We've also learned that we really need iterative outreach and education. Some of the materials that we develop are great and really resonate with a particular audience, but may not resonate with another audience. And then also recognizing that there's outreach and education that needs to happen along the customer journey as well. And so for someone who maybe has never heard of energy efficiency or they're really new to it, there's a different message that's being presented at that point versus someone who's already gone through a home energy assessment, has maybe, reached out to some of the contractors to perform that work. And then is really starting to decide, okay, how do I move forward? When do I move forward? Who do I move forward with? And so really thinking about targeted and tailored marketing to reach specific segments of the population is incredibly important. And then the last thing that I'll touch on is just coordination improvements. It's great that we have this huge, incredible program and really supportive partners in this space, but we definitely need better coordination across the different offerings. And so we started to see some of those improvements with lead sharing and referrals between contractors or different segments of the program, particularly between different customer income groups, et cetera. And so we're starting to see some of those improvements, but definitely more needs to happen. And I think also as we approach more comprehensive and holistic approaches to home improvements, and I think Alon is going to talk about that in the next presentation about the Philadelphia program, but definitely, again, we'll need improved coordination amongst contractors, amongst, incentive providers, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just want to echo one of the themes that's emerged from, starting actually the planning process for the 2025 to 2027 cycle. And so, the Equity Working Group's comprehensive list of recommendations for the 2025 to 2027 plan are around simplifying the customer experience, energizing and resourcing community partnerships with MassSave, and applying principles of distributive justice to reflect resources to underserved communities. And so just really wanted to highlight that really our end goal here is around distributive justice. And so we've made tons of process improvements to better support procedural justice, et cetera, but really thinking about how do we actually get benefits to the communities that haven't had access to them before. And then last, just process recommendations around this. So we've been involved really as a stakeholder, as a part of the Equity Working Group, and providing these recommendations, sharing experiences and stories that we've had from the different communities and organizations and populations that we work with. And so certainly I definitely recommend other folks that are pursuing some of the strategies that are listed in toolkits. It takes a lot of work to really implement those. And so today I just wanted to highlight some of the process and some of the work that we did along the way that has led us to this point. And so what I'd recommend really looking back on my experience is just, continuing to research, the different strategies that have been implemented across the country and as well in other countries. And speaking with folks that are in those communities to really understand what's worked well and what hasn't worked well, certainly as you can apply it to your own context. I would also say seek continual feedback from diverse stakeholder audiences. We did a lot of stakeholder engagement at the beginning, but as the times have changed, inflation, so many other things, we're starting to see that there are new challenges and barriers and opportunities that are emerging. And so constantly staying in conversation with folks to understand sort of what's happening, what they need is really important. And then last, just staying accountable through regular and transparent reporting and updates. Not all the solutions are going to be identified overnight. So as much as possible as we can sort of, keep folks engaged with what is happening, what's being piloted, what's being tested, I think helps keep folks also engaged in the work that you're doing. So hopefully that was helpful. But I will pass it now over to Alon. But if folks have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much. I'm going to load up my station here. Well, thank you all. Good afternoon for those of you in my time zone, at least. I'm Alon Abramson. I'm the Director of Residential Programs at the Philadelphia Energy Authority. So it's not the residential programs program, but a suite of programs directed at the residential sector, including a solar program and Built to Last, which I will be focusing on today. And before I jump in, just a quick thank you to ACEEE for inviting me to be here and for highlighting our program in this latest report. Quick note about who I'm with. The Philadelphia Energy Authority is a quasi-independent government agency in Philadelphia focused on leveraging energy as a tool for economic development, job creation, poverty alleviation, and public health improvements. We touch on all of that as part of the Built to Last program. And then, of course, the why. Philadelphia has the unfortunate distinction of being the poorest big city in America, and that manifests in a number of ways, but we have a astoundingly high and persistent poverty rate, very old housing stock, with a large portion requiring some level of pretty substantial improvements, estimated at around $3.7 billion. That has led to high asthma, really huge disparities in heat across the city between poor and wealthy neighborhoods, extremely high energy burdens, energy insecurity, and separate from that, but not entirely unrelated, is a really high unemployment rate, especially among African-American men. And therein is actually an opportunity, I think, to engage a large group to be part of this work, as we look to kind of remedy these, poor housing conditions in the city. So, and I'm just kind of flying through my deck. I want to be able to get through describing the Built to Last program and leave some room for questions. So hopefully this isn't too quick, and I'll have time to answer any questions that I may gloss over. But what I want to describe here is what the kind of administrative platform is that is Built to Last. But I should take a step back and explain, the idea here with our program is that we are trying to essentially address the deferred maintenance in our low-income housing, and specifically in owner-occupied homes. I know only one of the segments that we discussed as a kind of an underserved, population in Philadelphia and generally. But this program specifically is focused on low-income homeowners. We want to be able to address deferred maintenance and get to deep energy improvement, and we are doing that by kind of coordinating all the existing services that exist in Philadelphia to be able to work together to serve individual homeowners. And so the way we get to that, and there was a question earlier I saw asking why is coordination a medium intensity or medium difficulty endeavor? And it's because in order to get disparate programs run by different entities to work together, you need to think about benefit screening, right? Make sure that we understand what benefits and programs folks are eligible for, get them enrolled in those programs. And so basically try to align income requirements as much as possible, and really hold people's hands as much as is necessary to get them through that process of applying for everything. Secondly, we need to do holistic property assessments to understand everything that needs to be done in that home. This is a really important way to eliminate multiple referrals. We're really not trying to do handoffs so people can access benefits. We're really trying to coordinate these benefits. And then we're trying to then match the repair needs that we've identified through our assessment to the programs that exist that offer those repairs. So we know that there are some programs that just do repairs, some programs that are focused on energy measures, some are health, some are aging in place, and getting those programs to optimize, their spending on that home on measures that they can, actually pay for is critical for us. So we're kind of managing all of that. And in the end, we're doing the coordination of dispatching those different resources to be able to actually do that construction work in a single home in a coordinated way to really shorten our project timelines and make this as easy as possible for the end user, and not as minimally disruptive as possible as well. And one important note is that we do have additional capital that we bring in through this Built to Last program to fill in any gaps of work that nobody is traditionally paying for. I can think about pest remediation is a big one that we've identified, but also a lot of electrification measures and solar are traditionally not being paid for by programs in our market. And so, we see that need, we're able to provide the capital to do that work. So what this looks like, when you put this all together, is this holistic home, project. We're looking at basic systems to begin with, right? We have a lot of deferred maintenance in Philadelphia, and I think you're going to see this in your locality as well. And so you can't just come in and think about electrification when there are big basic systems problems, especially with the shell of the property. So we start there, make sure the roofs are intact, think about the health and safety along with energy efficiency, and then think about where we can kind of bundle in enhancements, things like fuel switching, electrification of every fossil fuel using device wherever that's possible, and then pairing that with solar is really our end goal. And really, what we're after is reducing energy burden for our households. And we want to do that in a long-term way. And we think electrification plus solar is the best way to do that long-term, right? We convert everything to electric where possible and cover all that electric usage with solar on that roof. Again, of course, after doing roof repairs where necessary. So those are our goals. And of course, this is a lot. And so we can't do this alone. And we're not doing it alone. We're actually have a large network of programs that already operate in Philadelphia that we're just bringing together under one umbrella with all that coordination work I described earlier. These are existing repair programs, as well as our utility programs. And on sort of the left side of this diagram is the sort of wraparound services that are so critical here to assist our community. We find a lot of need for legal services. We have a lot of unclear ownership situations for folks where they might have inherited the property from parent, grandparent, and that the fact that their name is not on the deed makes them ineligible for a lot of programs. So we want to make sure that they get legal services to go through probate and make sure that deed ends up in their name so they can come back and receive the benefits from those programs. And we don't just make that referral, we keep them in our system, keep them in our network, make sure that legal service is rendered and then they can come back in. This is similar for tax issues and utility arrearages and things that often prevent folks being able to access benefits. Similarly, there's other counseling issues, needs that come up, hoarding, other utility debt issues, and other matters that we have kind of a network of partners that can help us address. So what does this look like? We showing just one example here for property where we actually had the Secretary of Energy visit with one of our senators, and what we saw was intensive, moisture damage here. This is where her kitchen was located, so that was unusable. She had a collapsed chimney with a fossil fuel heating system, and so she was having, this is a multiple stroke victim who was also having chronic headaches and other issues related to the fact that her system was not actually properly exhausting. So we were able to eliminate the fossil fuel system, repair a lot of this damage. So electrify this property, installed solar, fixed moisture problems, rebuilt her kitchen. And we did this by stacking 4 different sets of funding. Our local basic systems repair program that's funded by HUD CDBG, Community Development Block Grants, the DOE Weatherization Assistance Program, Habitat for Humanity's local dollars for their repair programs, and then our supplemental Built to Last funds. All of that together is about a $50,000 project. We were able to deliver all these benefits, new windows, were also packaged in there. So it's a pretty comprehensive retrofit. Our program is still at relatively small scale. So that project that I just talked about with Nancy was one of our 50 pilot homes. We're now at about 100 nearly 100 homes completed with quite a robust pipeline of projects in development, nearing construction or in construction. And then we have another 900 or so folks in our wait list, all through word of mouth. And what I really want to show here, aside from there's a robust pipeline, but the distribution of our participants is really interesting because, again, we're not doing localized promotions. We are just, we've put the program out there. We start serving folks, people spread the word, community groups start to spread the word as well. What we see is enrollment is really aligned with the energy burden map. If I'd put on a map of health disparities, of heat disparities, of poverty, of redlining in Philadelphia, these would all essentially be the same map, and we'd see that same distribution. So I know there are probably questions, there often are, about how do you select when there's such a big need? How do you kind of ensure that you're getting to the right folks? And I can kind of show, at least from this one example, that you don't need to add additional restrictions, right? You're going to essentially get folks who need that assistance. And what we do also see is that there are people who are not in high energy burden areas and they still qualify on income. So they still need the support. And so, if we were only focused on highest energy burden areas, we would miss those folks as well. So something I want to highlight. Some highlights from our initial pilot that I described, the 50 homes. These are just initial survey responses, and we have not yet completed our full evaluation of energy impacts and the like. But all respondents signaled that they felt their home was safer after completing the work. Half of the participants who signaled some amount of some type of chronic illness up front told us that they felt an improvement in that illness. Folks like Nancy stopped having headaches after we eliminated the combustion, the non-vented combustion source in her home. We lowered utility costs. Really, this is like almost an immediately noticeable thing for half of those projects. Again, we'll go back and do a full assessment on our energy savings. We were able to deliver solar on 70% of our projects, some electrification in half of them. We do things, again, from HVAC, water heating, and cooking systems. And we tried to achieve 100% electrification. And we've avoided deferrals, specifically pointing to the WAP program, the weatherization program, in about a quarter of the projects in that pilot. The spending there is about $2.5 million all in, all funders. That's about $40,000 per home, with us spending about $14,000 of our own capital per project. So 3.6 programs leveraged per home. And we're really trying to up that, both the amount that our partners are putting in, as well as the number of disparate programs that we can bring into the mix. So I just want to highlight some of the work that we have been able to do. So massive retrofits on bathrooms and kitchens. And I know this is kind of thinking about energy here. So, but it's so important to think holistically about these homes. I mean, I know there's questions about health impacts and things like that. And if you don't have these basic facilities to prepare food, to wash hands, to do, to just have proper hygiene, that's a huge problem. That's like, I would say probably larger even than, their energy burden. We can argue, but we've also done a lot of HVAC work and electrified where possible. Window replacements, again, a really big focus for us. And many 100-year-old homes in Philly really do need them. And then that's kind of the end of my official presentation, but I saw a question about IRA programs and how we're thinking about leveraging that. So I just threw an extra slide in here really quick, and I'm going to spend just a quick minute talking about that. So I think there's several things we're thinking about for IRA and how we're going to incorporate that into Built to Last and just more broadly into kind of the other market segments. It's what I show here. Just Built to Last is really focused on folks really lower income households, under 60% of area median income. There's still this sort of middle income, 60 to 150% area median income folks. And then of course, market rate, whatever you want to call them, higher income folks over 150%. We really want to see electrification and energy efficiency happen broadly, right? And leverage IRA as much as possible in all these different market segments. So thinking about this almost as like a capital stack approach, like what funding can we bring in, from what sources, how do we deliver them most efficiently to these markets? So one, increased capacity for our partner agencies. And I think this is pretty obvious and but should not be overlooked. We already are seeing, one of the barriers for us doing the coordination is the capacity constraints of the partners. What technology systems do they have? What staffing, how tight is their administrative budget to be able to think about coordinating, right? These are big issues that we need to really be addressing if we're going to scale up our impacts. We want to be able to leverage the home energy, electrification rebates as much as we possibly can. When we're fully grant funding repairs like we do with Built to Last, we need to think about how to braid those funds with non-federal dollars. As far as we understand at this point, at least, those federal dollars can't be blended together. And so we need to find, less restricted forms of subsidy. And when there is a cost share, we need to figure out what other dollars are going to be available to help that household afford that work. That also means providing financing wherever possible. And I do think deploying capital from things like the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund is going to be really, really important. We want to provide guidance wherever possible for how folks can access tax credits, provide bridge financing where that's necessary to help them actually utilize those tax credits to be able to afford the upfront cost of equipment, and then maximize our Solar for All capital. We don't know exactly what we're going to be receiving in Pennsylvania, but we expect a pretty substantial investment. And we want to be able to deploy that as much as possible and layer that in with all the other work we're doing. So with that, I will actually stop sharing and turn it over to questions.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to all our speakers. Such a fantastic array of presentations and really great work that everybody's doing. There's been a ton of chatter on the chat about the quality of these presentations and these programs, and there's so many interesting and important questions to get to. There's just no way we'll get to them in the 10 minutes we have allotted. So I'm just going to do my best to kind of group a few questions and discussions together and get your takes on them. Most importantly, people ask all over and over again, are these slides going to be shared? Yes, they will be shared. Will the recording be shared? Yes, the recording will be shared. So that's out of the way. I guess, so let's start with Alexis, but Alon, this is also a question to you. Jamila Budlali asks, are there any tips for getting started with landlord engagement? She works in a city and several of her departments interact with landlords, but you don't have coordinated efforts. Similarly, Devin Williamson says, could you share more regarding landlord engagement? How do you identify landlords? How did you engage them directly through another entity? What engagement strategies works? And then Alon, Neil Larson also asked, does Built to Last primarily work with homeowners, or do you serve renters in the program? And have you worked on multifamily buildings? That's a question from Michael Friedman Wincheck. So lots there. Let's start with Alexis. How do you work with landlords?
Sure, I can start off with that. And so within Massachusetts, so the Mass Save program administrators have tons of different programs, but really the focus on landlord engagement, and I think some of the success with landlord engagement has been working with different organizations, for example, that are comprised of landlords. And so, for example, we have Mass Landlords, which is a nonprofit organization, and it's the largest of residential property owners and managers. And so meeting people really where they're already at and where they're already congregating. And so rather than trying to individually identify different landlords, if there are groups of landlords, for example, or specific folks that have sort of a wide array of properties that they owned, like sort of starting there, I think can be really helpful in terms of that outreach. But then again, like I mentioned in my presentation, also just tailoring the information to resonate really with landlords. And so for example, we have programs that are offered at no cost really to reach renters in our state. And so again, talking about the benefits there, it's easy to participate. There's limited to no copay. And so really communicating that with folks, I think helps the programs resonate with them.
I'll just answer my part. I tried to sort of state this up front, but Built to Last for now, all homeowner occupied. And there is a program that we don't run in Philadelphia called the Rental Improvement Fund that is targeting directly to landlord and renter occupied properties, small landlords, small properties, 2 to 4 unit. And that program is really mostly about home repair and code compliance, and not so much about energy. So they're just so different. Those worlds are so different that Built to Last is really a model for optimizing grant dollars for the in this market segment where grant dollars exist, and that is primarily like low-income homeowner occupants. So there's more work to be done, is all I'll say on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it is impressive when programs can reach both owners and renters. So that is a challenge that I think is impressive that you've managed to tackle. So one question that got a lot of attention in the Q&A was by Max Turstein. He or she asks, across all these projects, I'd love to, or they asks, across all these projects, I'd love to hear more about engagement strategies. Right now, we're doing door-to-door canvassing to promote local energy efficiency programs, but the cold and early darkness make it tricky. What else has worked most effectively? So I guess that's for both of you.
Alon, do you want to start?
I've been like feverishly responding to as many questions as possible, so apologies. I was reading other questions while Reuven was going through this. So more about engagement strategies, door-to-door. We are not doing a ton of engagement with this community, as I mentioned, for Built to Last. It's necessary for sure. You know, we want to make sure everybody who qualifies does know about this, but we don't think that we're actually the right people to do that. We have a broad network of community-based organizations that we're going to, you know, that we'll be relying on spreading that word. But we've been a little bit reluctant to push that out as much as we know we need to, because we have, you know, 900-person wait list and capital right now to do about 600 homes. And so, you know, we're a little bit hesitant to get people really amped up about a service that we can't guarantee they're going to be, you know, able to receive. So there's a little bit of a tension that we're feeling right now.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, some of the examples, and I can't necessarily speak to how some have been more successful over others, but in addition to the door knocking that's happening, I think historically a lot of the outreach has been through bill inserts. And so, you know, flyers that describe programs that are sent every month when you get your, you know, gas or electric bill. And those are helpful to an extent, but, you know, not everyone is really checking those bills, or maybe they have them on auto pay. And so what we've seen also be successful is local tabling events by our community partners that are doing this work. And so the event may not be necessarily an Earth Day event or a climate focused event, but it could be an event about anything. So it could be, you know, a farmer's market, or, you know, other types of events, and meeting people sort of where they're at. We've also seen partnerships, for example, with the Boys and Girls Club. And so when parents are dropping their kids off or picking them up, you know, also sharing materials about programs there. We've seen radio ads in different languages, for example, be really successful. You know, I would say flyers and advertising on public transportation as well. And so there's all types of things happening, and certainly more of it is happening in other languages as well to reach a broader population.
Thanks. I'm going to skip over to a question that I particularly have interest in, which is from Kayla Groff. Any suggestions for areas that don't have funding for roof repairs and similar structure needs? This tends to be one of our largest barriers in the area prior to weatherization and Empower Plus work, which includes insulation. And this is something that I'm interested in, because here at the health program, we're studying, you know, pre-weatherization programs and deferrals. Jasmine, I don't know if you have anything to comment on, or if any of the three of you have. Maybe somebody can jump in.
Yes, I had responded to that question through text. I had directed the person to the toolkit, because within the toolkit, there's a strategy that talks about braiding funding from WAP, the Weatherization Assistance Program, LIHEAP, the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program, and other income eligibility programs. I particularly recommend looking at different health funding sources, as sometimes health sources like Medicaid or the Children's Health Insurance Program can allow funding for actions that do end up improving health, such as home repairs.
Well, thanks. And on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. There's so many questions that it's physically impossible to read them all, let alone answer them. I'm going to share these questions with our speakers, that if they have the time and bandwidth, they can reply individually. I just wanted to say a huge thank you once again for our speakers to show up. Jasmine, thank you for writing the report and bringing us all together. I'm going to put a link to the report, or it's not a report, but a toolkit, in the chat once again. If anybody's interested in using the toolkit to help improve programs to serve these underserved residential communities, please go to that report, toolkit rather, download it and use it at your pleasure. I think that's about it. Does anybody else want to share one last thought before we head out, or should I just wrap it up? Oh yes, one last thing before we go is just to mention that ACEEE has a number of convenings, and we have a few conferences coming up. We talk about a lot of these topics and others. Our Hot Water Forum is March 12th to to what? 12th to 4th. I'll have to correct that slide, but it's in March 2024, and our summer study in buildings is August 4th to 9th. Thank you so much for coming, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you at the next BEC webinar. Take care.